Hey folks, Alamatic, the Hot Rod Hippie here. This video is C10 Build vlog number, I don't know what. I'm back in North Carolina working on my dad's 65 GMC Build. I'm going to show you the final color the truck's actually going to be today, and we're also going to do the custom stainless steel brake lines on the truck in this video. You might say to yourself, boy, it looks a whole lot rougher than it used to. That's because that's the parts truck. That's a Chevy, not the truck we're working on. Let's go check out the GMC. This here is the 65 GM. Let me readjust this. And this is the color scheme of the truck. It's this kind of sky blue with white accents. That's the overall theme we're going for here. This isn't the GM original color that was used back in the day with this color combination, though I don't think in this era specifically, but it's just one we picked out of a catalog. Actually, it was a fleet color. So the kind of color you might paint a fleet of vehicles to kind of keep your costs down and keep your uniform color across your company. This is one of those paints. So not only was it a little bit cheaper than some other paint options, it was just the color that we wanted for this setup. You know, it's funny that my dad went around the block on color combinations. He was looking at oranges, he was looking at gunmetal grays, and this is actually the color that I wanted to paint this truck when I bought it like 9 years ago when I was living in Texas. So I'm really happy to see it come a full circle. He decided, yeah, you know what, that classic look is gonna look good on this truck, and I'm really happy to see it coming together. You're gonna have to wait to see, obviously, the rest of the way the white plays into the whole build, but we'll get there eventually. Okay, color out of the way, it's time to dive in and actually work on this truck. The next thing on my agenda is plumbing the stainless steel brake lines on this truck. Now, I've already plumbed the air ride system, the fuel system, the transmission cooler lines. I have not done the brake lines yet. It was one of the last things that I would have done when I was here in North Carolina previously, and I kind of just was burned out at that point and decided, yeah, I'll do those when I come down next time. So let's dive into doing it. In this box is a couple of coils of stainless steel brake line I'm going to be using. Each of these is 25 feet long. I didn't think one was going to be quite enough for this project. The most common question I get when I'm doing work like this is, what tools are you using? What benders do you use? All of that. So let's just get that out of the way right here, right now. I'll show you what tools I'm going to use and we'll dive into actually doing the work. First up, I got this. This is my tubing straightener. This is how I'm going to straighten out these coils of tubing into a straight line that I can actually work with. Okay, I talk benders in every hardline video, but let's talk about what I'm using today. The Imperials here are my old standbys that I used to use on 3/16 all the time. They work just fine. They're a affordable option. They work. But what I use primarily now are these rigid ones. Obviously, they're significantly larger, so they apply more leverage. With stainless steel tubing, that is important. It's difficult with the smaller ones. And also they have rollers in here. Now the rollers actually provide a smoother action as well, which also makes it easier to bend stainless steel. They are just a vastly superior design in every single way, but the price reflects that. I want to say those things run me $120, $130 for the 1/3/16 size, but they're a copy of the swage lock ones, which I have a 3/8 swage lock set that I adore, but those retail for $400 to $500. I bought this 3/8 set on eBay used. I want to say I paid $200 for those used. For flaring on this project, we're going to be using this Master Cool hydraulic set that I have. I use this for double 45-degree flares as well as the single 37-degree flares that we're going to be doing today. First step when I'm plumbing anything is to mock up the parts I'm actually going to be working with. In this case, the brake system, I've got this combination valve that's going to mount to the frame rail, aka proportioning valve. And then I have this rear brake hose as well that I need to get onto the truck. It goes from the axle up to the frame rail. So I'm also going to mock up the fittings that I'm going to be using. That way I know if I have all of the fittings I need, or if I need to run out and pick up some more before I dive into things, or if I need to order more. Luckily here in North Carolina, I have a lot of race suppliers where I can go pick up these fittings if I need, but if I was somewhere else, I might have to order them. Such as this combination valve. At the moment, I've got the two fittings that come from the brake master cylinder down to here, and the rear line that heads to the back of the truck. But I don't have the fittings in here for the front two lines. Do I have them? At the moment, I don't know. I'm gonna mock this up and dig into my boxes and see if I have the fittings so I can continue on. After mocking up the components that I had, I started looking for the fittings that I needed. As I said, I wanna mock up all of the fittings in position so I know I have exactly what I need. And exactly as I was worried about, every single box I went through, I didn't have any of the fittings that I needed. I got some, just a handful. I don't know why I didn't end up getting all of the ones that I needed when I picked up those. It's been months, so I just can't remember. As such, I had to go pick up some more. So we jumped in the car and headed up the road. I headed to the place that I've shown in the video before called SRI. This place is an excellent little find. It has all kinds of fittings and parts and tools, and there's just a lot of stuff here that you can find useful for building a car. And they've actually become my go-to welding gas supplier and welding supply supplier as well. Welding supply supplier here in the area as well. Their prices are unmatched by anywhere I've ever done business with before. After I got back, I went right back to mocking up everything I was doing previously because, well, that's where I left off and had to redo. So I now have all the fittings I actually need. I also immediately tightened all of the fittings into place. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, I want to make sure that they're tight. I don't want to have to worry about it later. The sooner I do this, the less worry I have later. Of course, I'll double check things later, but it makes sense to do this now. Two, I also want these to be threaded in as far as they can go now, meaning that if I have a damaged fitting, I have a damaged component, I want to find that now. You're working with brake lines that a lot of these companies are selling at these local parts stores. It's not uncommon to find some random boogered up thread in something. Now is the time to find that versus later when you're wanting to bleed the brakes and, oh, it's leaking because I never really got that fitting tight. Do it now. And number three, the third reason for doing it is I want the fittings to be where they're going to be when I'm building my lines. Some of these fittings, if I hand tighten them in there, they stop rather quickly, but I can then tighten them in with a wrench or a ratchet significantly further into their bore. And it's not that the threads are boogered up, it's just that they're a little tight. So if I didn't tighten those in there before, I could end up making a line that's a little too short. And when I tighten all the fittings into place, now I need to remake a line because it wasn't quite right. Or at the very least, I have to rebend and mess with a line. I don't want to have to do that. I want everything tight so I have a good starting point. Now let's get down to actually making these hard lines. Step number one for me was to dive in and straighten out some of this tubing. I'm going to use this for something I've shown in my hardline tubing basics video, something I call my gauges. After straightening out a couple of feet of line, I go ahead and mark every 6 inches on it and cut off 6-inch lengths so I have some stock to start with. Now, the idea here is I want to stick that 6-inch piece into my tubing bender, the bender that I'm going to be using on this project. I lock it in place, I mark the 0 point on the degree wheel of the bender, and then I bend it to a set angle. This one has 10 different marks on there from 0 to 180, so I want to bend a bunch of these to those different marks. Then I repeat the process for all the different angles that I want. In this case, I did 9 of them. I went from 15 degrees up to 150 degrees. I figure anything over 150, I'm probably just gonna go to 180, and that's fairly obvious what I need to do. These are gonna be so helpful, and I'll show you in just a second what we're gonna use them for. I'm gonna start with the back line, the one that goes from the proportioning valve to the rear axle drop hose. I think it becomes pretty apparent real quick what the point of these gauges is. I can go ahead and stick these into this sleeve of the tube nut and figure out exactly where I want to point my line, use different angles to figure it out. At first I thought, 30 degrees is probably going to be right, but it was too heavy of an angle. So I stuck a 15 degree in there, and I actually realized that even a 15 degree is probably not going to be what I want. I might actually split the difference and do like a 7.5 degree bend onto this. I have to see how I feel about it as I start. Back to the straightener, and I'll straighten out a length of tubing. Now I'm going to head to the frame rail and decide how long of a piece I want to start with. I of course always want to make things in as few pieces as I can. The less unions, the less fittings, the less chance of leaking. However, I also want to think about serviceability. I also want to think about access to the parts. I need to be able to make lines that are actually going to be able to be installed in here and removed. So as such, I generally break lines up pretty heavily. The first 2 hurdles that I really have to work around coming out of the combination valve is the 2 body mounts for the cab, and I also have to consider the room that I'm going to have to the floor of the cab on the truck. As such, it looks like something like a 52-inch piece is going to be what I need, so I'm going to add 6 inches to that so that I have some wiggle room in there. If my estimation's wrong, if I decide to put a few extra bends in there, bends consume length, so I do need to consider that. Of course, my first bend doesn't matter. By that I mean that it can be oriented any which way on the tubing, and it's not going to affect things since it's the first bend. There's nothing for it to be oriented with. But every subsequent bend is going to matter its orientation because it is going to need to be clocked a certain way. Otherwise, I just end up with a weird thing that doesn't fit anything. So there's one specific trick trick that I use when I'm orienting tubing so that I know I get it right. After I have the tubing mocked in where I want it, and I use my gauges to mark the start of my bend angle. I check it where I want it, I mark the start of the bend angle, then I step back and I look at the tubing and I figure out where I want the outside of the bend radius to be. Does it need to go bend toward the frame rail, away from the frame rail, whatever. I just need to figure that out and mark that. I put a straight line along the length of the tubing on the outside of my bend radius, where I believe it needs to be. Then it's as simple as putting the tubing into my tubing bender and making sure that that line that I placed on there is facing toward me, away from the bend radius, on the outside of the die. If I put the tubing in there and I can't see that line, well then I know it's not oriented properly. Now it's as simple as just continuing on. Mock it back up in position, hold it where I want it, mark it with the gauge, and then move forward with the next bend, and just continue on step after step. As soon as I get to a point where I think a clamp can go, I'm going to put one on. What I most commonly use and have for years is from this company called Made For You Products. They have these single and double clamps. They come in a range of sizes. I use them on the air ride and the fuel system for the 3 ace lines that I did there, but I got some 3/16 ones for this build. But I'm actually not going to use them on this build. You see, recently I got into 3D printing and I'm completely addicted to it. In fact, I've got a 3D print running over in the corner right now. It's going to be a 25-hour total print. So I just printed up a handful of these on my Creality Ender 3 out of PETG, so it should hold up fine in an open air environment on the outside of the frame rail like this for what I'm doing. Obviously, I need to attach those to the frame rail. I could do a couple of things. I could drill and tap the frame. It's thick enough that for the 1032 screw, it should be fine. But I'm going to use the FSI rib nut tool that I've done a dedicated video about in the past. You can check out the link up above or in the description down below. That tool is so handy, and I'm going to install a couple of rib nuts along the frame rail so I can attach these clamps to it. I ended up putting a total of 3 clamps along the frame rail for this line. The more the merrier. It's just going to be more secure. There's no reason not to. Now, one of the biggest hurdles you might come across is a situation where you get to a point where your tubing is bumping into an obstruction, such as this body mount that I have to work my way around. I'll, maybe consider breaking my tubing before that, ending it so I have a start point to begin from, or I'll start holding up gauges and just start planning my bends from here. I won't bend fully, so if I want to put a 15-degree bend on that, I will bend the bare minimum that I have to get around my obstruction. Sometimes that ends up being a 90-degree bend or something, but I try to do the bare minimum I can and then recheck it. When I do tubing work the way that I do it, well, it's a lot of put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. Like with bodywork or welding, that's the way this goes. A lot of building a car is patience. There's a reason that quality work isn't cheap. It's because there's not only skill involved, but also time. I'm constantly getting people asking for quicker ways of doing things or a way to cut a corner, and quite simply, there isn't one. Experience will speed you up, absolutely. Quality tools can help, but at the end of the day, time is time, and you're not going to be able to just fast forward through a project. I mean, really, honestly, I had hoped to do the entire run from that combination valve to the rear line, but it took too long for me to get to this point, honestly. As such, I'm going to go ahead and stop right here and leave the line where it is for the moment because I want to get this video out for you folks. 2 reasons why. 1, I want to get this video uploaded, have a weekly upload for you folks. 2, because I don't think I'm going to be able to film the rest of this process very well. You're going to see here that putting this gauge in for where my next line is going to go, it's going to be snaking between portions of the bed and mounts for the compressor. It's going to have to head up and over the kick up for the frame rails, which is within the bed structure. I don't think I'm going to be able to set the camera up and really film this without having a film crew here to work around me and point the camera where it needs to be all the time. You'll be able to find finished pictures of this on my website, Instagram, Facebook, and most likely TikTok as well. Now, there are a few important points that I haven't made that I should make right now. I'm using stainless steel tubing on this build, which means that I have to use a 37-degree single flare. As such, here's your disclaimer. 37-degree single flares and fittings on your brake system are off-road use only, race car stuff. The typical response that all kinds of companies send little warnings as off-road use only for this part that we clearly made for a street vehicle. 37-degree single flare on stainless steel tubing is just, it's not approved for use by highway safety boards. That said, there are fighter jets and bombers and all kinds of stuff flying over your head right now with fuel lines and hydraulic lines and all kinds of stuff using this design. Take that as you will. I cannot tell you how to do things, but I do need to state that I do not endorse you doing this on your own vehicle for legal reasons. That said, the techniques I've shown here apply with steel tubing, with the nickel copper tubing that's out there, with 45-degree double flares and metric bubble flares. All of these things still apply. I still recommend all of the same steps, except for obviously the AN fittings and the 37-degree single flaring. I want to take a quick moment to thank my patrons on Patreon. Thank you to these fine folks who help to make production of this content possible. Hands-on work like I do, demonstrating this stuff for you, requires parts, time, materials, tools, all kinds of things that other content production just doesn't require. And these folks help to make that a possibility. If you would consider, please check out the Patreon account, patreon.com/HotRodHippie. It directly supports this channel. Alright, I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, folks. You got to see the color of the truck. You got to see some of the tubing work that I was doing on this thing. I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover in there. Let me know if you have questions about any of that stuff down in the comments down below. And yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, folks. It turned into a little more of an instructional video than a vlog, but hey, here we are. If you found this video interesting, please go ahead and drop it a like. It really helps out. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of the project here? What do you think of the color on the truck, the color combination? Let me know in the comments down below. Get subscribed to keep up to date with all the Hot Rod Hippie content and more C10 content to come. Thanks for coming around, folks.